the ayes to the right 330, the noes to the left 275.
I'm at Westminster as MPs take the momentous first step to legalise assisted dying in England and Wales after hours of impassioned debate on both sides.
Let's be clear, we are not talking about a choice between life or death. We are talking about giving dying people a choice of how to die.
Yeah. We are the people who protect the most vulnerable in society from harm, and yet we stand on the brink of abandoning that role.
Relief for supporters outside as MPs back their cause, but deep disappointment for opponents. We'll bring you all the reaction after this landmark vote that could enshrine the right for terminally ill people to choose the time of their own death.
And also on tonight's programme, Louise Haigh resigns as Transport Secretary after revelations she pleaded guilty to a criminal offence involving a mobile phone. More people come forward with allegations that TV host Greg Wallace made inappropriate sexual comments. And the gleaming interior of Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral, fully restored after a devastating fire.
And on BBC London this hour, a busy Black Friday, but there's a desperate plea from small shops to use them or lose them in the lead up to Christmas.
Good evening from Westminster, where MPs have taken a historic step towards legalising assisted dying in England and Wales. There were 5 hours of highly impassioned and emotional debate among MPs in Parliament just behind me, and the result could mark one of the biggest social changes this country has seen for decades. It represents the first step in giving terminally ill people the right to choose to end their own life. And in recognition of the magnitude of their decision, the result was met by MPs not with cheers of approval, but with complete silence. It was a free vote, meaning that MPs could vote with their conscience as opposed to following party orders. And here's what the numbers looked like. 330 MPs voted in favour of the bill, 275 voted against it. That's a majority of 55. And here's what the bill contains. It says that those over the age of 18 who want to end their own life must be expected to die within 6 months. They must have 2 doctors and a High Court judge to approve the decision. And then a patient would have to wait 14 days before administering the medication themselves to end their life. But there are still many months of parliamentary activity to go before the bill can become law. In a moment, we'll talk to our medical editor Fergus Walsh and to our political editor Chris Mason about what happens next. But first, here's Vicky Young on how the day unfolded.
Our voice, our choice.
They came to Westminster to have their say, to make their final pleas to MPs.
Sisters to live, not to die.
Powerful voices and personal experiences on both sides of this debate.
Not to die.
Don't do this. It is the wrong way to go. They are playing roulette with our lives in the future, and they should stop.
But for others, it's about choosing the way they'll die. Jenny has terminal cancer.
Changing the law to find a more humane way to die, to allow my children to see me in a peaceful state, will be so much better for them.
Order, order.
This isn't a government bill. It's been introduced by Labour MP Kim Leadbeater, so MPs have no party orders to follow.
Any one of us or our loved ones could be unfortunate or unlucky enough to receive a terminal diagnosis. And I struggle to see how it is fair or just to deny anyone the autonomy, dignity and personal choice that we might want to take control of our final weeks.
I agree with the honourable gentleman.
But many MPs worry that some terminally ill patients will be pressured into taking this path.
People do not generally write letters to sick relatives urging them to consider assisted suicide and then put the letter on file. And coercion in the family context can be about not what you say, but about what you don't say.
Crucially,
Mary Kelly Foy spoke about Maria, her late disabled daughter.
I am filled with dread and fear for those other people like Maria who are non-verbal and don't have that capacity, and what might happen to others like Maria if they aren't loved and cared for.
And there are limits to palliative care.
Others focused on terminally ill patients whose pain can't be alleviated.
Currently for these patients, we can offer no agency over their end, no alternative to this terrifying death. Can we truly say that's compassionate?
If we don't pass the bill today, we are cornering all those people. We are trapping them with the law against their disease and consigning them to an end of torture and degradation which they do not wish to go through. But whatever happens today, terminal people will still take their own lives. All we are deciding today is how.
I do thank the Honourable.
The patchy provision of end-of-life care was a concern for several MPs.
You can be certain, and I mean absolutely certain, that those NHS trusts with the weakest palliative care offer will be those with the highest incidence of people choosing to die. In other words, it was not really their choice at all.
When I was 6 years old...
As a child, Marie Titbull was in hospital and in pain. She recalls telling her parents she wanted to die.
That moment made it clear to me that if this bill was about intolerable suffering, I would not be voting for it. But that moment also gave me a glimpse of how I would want to live my death, just as I've lived my life, empowered by choices available to me, living that death with the dignity and respect.
This was the kind of debate that doesn't happen often here, personal, emotional, and with repercussions for millions.
Order! Order.
The result was heard in silence by MPs crammed into the Commons.
The ayes to the right, 330. The noes to the left, 275.
For the MP behind the bill, there was a sense of relief.
A bit overwhelmed, to be honest. That's been a really emotional day on top of an emotional number of months. And I never even wanted to be an MP. But look, we've shown Parliament in its best light today. Very respectful, very compassionate debate, irrespective of the different views that people hold.
This bill has passed its first hurdle, but there will now be several months of debate as MPs pore over the details. It heralds a huge societal change in the way that the terminally ill approach their final days.
Today, MPs approved the principle of assisted dying. Now Parliament and the government must find a way to make it work in practice. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as we saw in Vicky's report there, crowds of campaigners, both for and against the bill, gathered outside Parliament during the debate. Our medical editor Fergus Walsh has been getting their reaction to the vote.
A truly historic moment. And look what it means to campaigners for assisted dying. Among them, Elise Burns, who is terminally ill with advanced breast cancer.
I'm over the moon, but I'm in complete shock.
What does this mean for you personally, Elise?
Probably for me personally, I mean, it's going to take a couple of years, so it's unlikely that I'll get to die at home. But it means the world that people I love and so many people here, and thousands of people will get to die, or get to choose how they die.
Christy Arnston, who also has advanced breast cancer, was here with her husband.
I am so joyous. I believe we're on the path to something completely compassionate and caring, and something that so many people will benefit from.
And what about for you personally, Christy?
For me, I, for the first time, have a little bit of hope I might make it in time to actually use this. I dare to dream that that might be the case.
This is a hugely important moment for the terminally ill, their families, and for society. It sets England and Wales on a path to join countries like Australia, New Zealand, and some US states, which offer choice at the end of life. For supporters, it's about compassion, autonomy, and dignity. For opponents, it's a dangerous step which will undermine the rights of the vulnerable.
The ayes to the right, 330.
Disability rights activist Liz Carr says the fight to stop the bill goes on.
Of course I'm gutted. I'm exhausted. I think everybody is, you know, and we just know we have the fight ahead. The Bills, yes, they've spoken today. It's not the end of the road. It doesn't mean it's legalised. So we still have chances to go, listen, these are the very real concerns.
Sisters to live, not to die!
Daniel Diep's mum died of breast cancer 2 years ago.
From what I saw with my mother, you know, when she was in her last 6 months to live, she was exceedingly vulnerable. Every time she went to see her oncologist, she, you know, found out how long she had left to live. And in that most vulnerable moment, for your doctor to say to you, you know, why don't you consider killing yourself, is not something that I think should be on the statute books of this country.
The placards are being packed away for now, but the passionate debate will continue. If the bill becomes law, it could be another 2 to 3 years before the first assisted death in England and Wales. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, one of the most prominent supporters pushing for a change to the law is the television presenter Esther Rantzen, who's suffering from terminal cancer. She told the BBC the change in the law is unlikely to come in time for her to have an assisted death at home, but she welcomed what it may bring for others.
People will make their own choice, and if it's available to them and they choose an assisted death, and they're 6 months away from dying in any case, I think it's right, I think it's fair, I think it's just. Whatever their background, whatever their income, whatever their ethnic group, whatever their belief, I think everybody should have the choice.
Well, Fergus Walsh is with me now, as is our political editor, Chris Mason. Chris, first of all to you, such a momentous day this. What sort of thing have MPs been saying to you privately?
Rachel, I've spent most of my working life reporting on Parliament, and today felt like a standout moment, a moment where Parliament collectively rose with a sense of self-awareness to the magnitude of the occasion. It wasn't the normal partisan party politics. You heard expansive, passionate arguments for 5 consecutive hours. And speaking to MPs immediately afterwards privately, firstly, they on both sides were drawn to that moment of silence immediately after the result was read out, a deafening silence, because normally after a vote it's incredibly noisy. Now, those who had backed the change felt it was a respectful nod to the potential magnitude of what is coming. Those on the other side felt it was a collective sense of, gosh, what have we done here? The other thing that I noted, speaking to some of those who had backed this change today, is they were saying they wouldn't necessarily back it at later stages. So there are some on both sides of the argument with passionate and very set views. There are some who would see themselves in the middle, who are still open to persuasion either way. And it underlines that central point that this is the start of a debate to come rather than the end of it.
Fergus, what might happen next?
Well, for what is arguably the biggest social change since the Abortion Act in 1967, there's a lot to sort out, and the government, which has been neutral on this issue, is going to have to look at the impact on the NHS, on hospices, on the healthcare service and on the judiciary. Now, healthcare workers can opt out of being involved, but it's going to take 2 doctors to approve each application, plus a High Court judge. Now, it's part of a growing trend. Since 2015, when MPs last voted and rejected it, more and more jurisdictions around the world have grappled with this issue and introduced a right to die. California, New Zealand, Spain, Austria, New Zealand. So it's a huge moment, but as Chris and others have said, it's not law yet, and there's a long way to go.
Chris and Fergus, thank you both very much indeed. Now, in a separate development here in Westminster, Downing Street has said that the Prime Minister accepted the former Transport Secretary Louise Hay's resignation after further information emerged relating to a criminal offence to which she pleaded guilty a decade ago. Writing to Sir Keir Starmer, Louise Hay said she did not want to be a distraction. The Prime Minister's official spokesman refused to respond to questions about what Sir Keir Starmer had known about Louise Hay's conviction before yesterday. Here's Ian Watson.
This is how the fate of a mobile phone a decade ago called time on Louise Haig's cabinet career today. Keir Starmer accepted her resignation after news of a spent conviction became public. 15 years ago, she was a special constable, but the roots of her resignation can be traced back to when she contacted police in 2013. She was a victim of a mugging and told officers her work phone was missing, but it later turned up at her home. She said she'd made a mistake and pled guilty to a fraud offence, she says, on her lawyer's advice, which she now regrets. Louise Haig's friends claim the Prime Minister threw the ex-Transport Secretary under the proverbial bus because they say he knew the full story of her conviction before he appointed her to the shadow cabinet, never mind the actual cabinet, and they accuse him of not being willing to spend political capital defending her.
It feels at least like he's panicked in the face of some media attack on one of the most effective cabinet ministers he's got. I mean, she's already steered through legislation to bring the railways into public ownership. She's getting on with re-regulating the buses.
But now her fraud conviction has come to light, the Conservatives are questioning why Keir Starmer appointed her in the first place.
It sounds like Keir Starmer appointed her in full knowledge of this background. So was that the right decision? I think most of my constituents would think that that was a questionable decision.
But Downing Street say the Prime Minister only accepted her resignation when further information emerged. They won't specify what this is. What we do know is she didn't inform the relevant civil servants of her offence when she became a cabinet minister. She had resigned from the insurance giant Aviva, her employer, when the work phone went missing. I'm told it had been carrying out an internal investigation, though the company itself won't comment. Louise Haig didn't always see eye to eye with Keir Starmer, but it was past events and not current performance that derailed her cabinet career. Ian Watson, BBC News.
Well, I'll have more on today's historic vote later in the programme, but now it's back to Jane in the studio with the rest of the day's news.
Thanks, Rita. More people have come forward with allegations that the TV presenter Greg Wallace made inappropriate sexual comments while working on a number of different programmes. Yesterday, following a BBC News investigation, the production company which makes MasterChef said Greg Wallace would step away from the show while the claims are investigated. His lawyers have called the accusations entirely false. Nora Nanji reports.
He's the colourful host of some of Britain's most loved shows, best known as the face of MasterChef.
Chefs, we have just 3 minutes.
Last night, he was on our screens.
Right, chefs, you've got a job to do.
But earlier in the day, it had been decided by the programme bosses that Greg Wallace would step away from further filming after BBC News approached him with allegations from 13 people about inappropriate comments across 17 years.
You are professional MasterChef semi-finalists.
One of them was James, not his real name. He worked on MasterChef back in 2005.
During a tasting of one of the contestants' dishes, John Turode is struggling to describe the dish. He says, you know, I can't think of what this dish reminds me of. And Greg suddenly comes in and says, I know what this reminds me of. It's me aunt's.
And what did everyone say?
People were stunned. There was a sharp intake of breath. The room was stunned to silence. And that was very unusual because by this stage, everyone was accustomed to Greg making off-colour remarks. But this was way more extreme, and I think people were genuinely shocked.
Adam, not his real name, says the similar comments continued. He worked on a travel show with Wallace in 2022.
Greg Wallace would say, I love spanking multiple times a day, and he talked about threesomes with prostitutes in front of us, including female crew members. He would also single in on the younger girls in the team, making sexually lewd jokes. The comments were relentless.
The allegations come at a difficult time for the BBC. Last month, it announced details of a review into preventing abuses of power, with its chair saying there continues to be a sense that powerful people get away with it. BBC News is editorially independent from the wider organisation. And since our initial story, we have continued to investigate, with more people coming forward. His lawyers strongly deny any sexually harassing behaviour took place.
What's that?
But tonight, the charity Ambitious About Autism has dropped him as an ambassador in light of the allegations.
I'm really enjoying it.
Nora Nanji, BBC News.
A man has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 28 years for the murder of his brother-in-law and attempted murder of his wife on the Isle of Skye. 41-year-old Finlay MacDonald was also found guilty of attempting to murder a couple in their 60s on the same day. It's believed the attacks, which the judge called brutal and mindlessly violent, took place within an hour and a half. The Bank Santander says it's seeing an increasing number of 18 to 24-year-olds being scammed into laundering money. As part of the BBC's Scam Safe Week, Radio 1's Newsbeat has been looking into what's called money mule fraud, when someone's bank account is used in a chain of transactions to transfer funds linked to criminals. Acting as a money mule can result in a prison sentence of up to 14 years and a ban on having a bank account for 6 years. Pete Allison reports.
So I sent £500 and he made me £5,000 back. This guy is a genius.
Promises of quick cash all over social media.
£6 grand today, I cannot believe it.
But it's all a scam and it's breaking the law.
So the people who respond to these adverts are sometimes known as money mules. Their bank accounts are used by criminals to move money in a chain of transactions, making it more difficult for authorities to track. People like DeRay.
Alright guys, how you doing? Hope you're doing well.
DeRay shared his story on YouTube to warn others about his experience.
I've got a serious story to tell you all today.
He'd seen a friend posting on social media about money they'd made.
It was about flashy cars, for example, holidays or like watches, that kind of thing.
He allowed that person to put £4,000 in his bank account. The plan, he'd withdraw it the next day, hand it over and keep a bit for himself. He followed his friend's instructions, but then his bank account was shut down.
You're unable to use a bank account like for at least 6 years. So you can't get credit, you can't get a loan, a mortgage.
DeRay had been blacklisted by a fraud prevention service used by many of the UK's top banks.
I felt, why have I done it? I felt a bit ashamed and I was a bit nervous to tell my own mum about it all. She was shocked and why I did it, and she was upset. What she said, son, you can fix it. Do what you got to do to get your life back.
Although DeRay wasn't prosecuted, he had to appeal to financial authorities repeatedly to have a bank account again. So why do people do it? This video is used to show students how money mules can be recruited in person as well as online.
So basically I've got these mates who just put money into your account, they keep it there for a bit and they take it back out, but they leave you with a bit of a cut.
It's not always easy to spot the scam.
They're not bad kids that want to do harm. They, you know, if I went up to them and said, go and mug that old lady, they'd go, absolutely not, I'm not a criminal. But if I said, well, I'll tell you what, just let me put that money in your account, you can take a little bit for helping me out, that doesn't feel like criminal.
Banks say the number of young people involved is going up.
That is a 25% increase for people between the age of 18 and 24.
But many don't talk to their bank until it's too late.
We'll try and contact them. We might send letters, make phone calls, get in touch with them to talk about what's happened. And we often hear absolutely nothing. We often might find out maybe a few years later when someone realises the red flags that we put on their account or on their credit footprint essentially mean they lose access to the loan they want, or maybe even a job they're trying to get.
But by that point, they've become linked to organised crime, like drug dealing, human trafficking and terrorism, and at the same time been scammed into destroying their own future. Pete Allison, BBC News.
Now, the gleaming, restored interior of Notre Dame Cathedral has been shown off to the public 5 years after it was devastated by fire. France's President Macron took a televised tour of the cathedral and praised the craftsmen and women who'd worked on the £580 million project. From Paris, here's Andrew Harding.
The scaffolding has come down, and like a burns patient shedding her bandages, Notre Dame is revealed today, whole again after years of delicate surgery. Inside, the cathedral is a dazzle of light. The ash, debris and centuries of accumulated grime all gone. France's President Emmanuel Macron ushering in the cameras this morning for the first time since the fire, and revelling in a risky promise kept to rebuild this broken miracle of stone, glass and timber in just 5 years. Macron thanked the team responsible for saving the soul of France.
We were told it wasn't possible, that it was crazy, we'd do it wrong. But you came together with determination, and you achieved what seemed impossible.
It was late on April the 15th, 2019, that Notre Dame burst into flames. It's still not clear if a cigarette or an electrical fault was to blame. The spires collapse, prompting a global groan of anguish, and then a collective flood of generosity. The French state, which owns the cathedral, hired 2,000 craftsmen, using new and ancient technologies to patch up the gargoyles, restore the famous bells, clean acres of stained glass, and carve 1,200 oak trees to replace Notre Dame's medieval roof beams. The grand opening may be a week away, but for the workers, this is the time to celebrate.
For all of us, we're very proud today to have been lucky enough to work on this cathedral.
For France, it's the symbol of France, of Paris, of all the French people that were crying in 2019, and now this is a new way for all the French people.
This is a profound, rousing moment for all of France. At a time of deepening political polarisation, the rebirth of Notre Dame is a reminder of what this society can achieve when it pulls together and when the money is right. The tourists are now waiting for their chance to see the inside of a building not only rescued, but transformed. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Paris.
Now, as promised, we'll hear more about our main story tonight. MPs voting in favour of allowing assisted dying. Back to Rita at Westminster. Rita.
Jane, thank you. It's been one of those rare days in Westminster where MPs put aside their party differences and debate and then vote with their consciences and their hearts. Inside Parliament and outside, we've heard highly moving and personal testimony from people who feel very strongly on both sides about the ethical dimensions to legalising assisted dying, and for MPs, the heavy responsibility of their decision. Well, our political editor, Chris Mason, joins me again. And Chris, we know more now about how individual MPs and ministers voted.
We do, and as you were hinting at there, it's a day of curious coalitions. So the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, voting in the same way as his immediate predecessor, Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak writing in his local paper tonight that he believed that this was a compassionate change. And so you have this Prime Minister and the previous one both voting in the same direction. Over the last few days, we've heard of other previous Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson and Gordon Brown amongst them. Again, not two people who would often be on the same side of a political argument, both saying that they were opposed to it. Now neither of them are in the Commons anymore. So yeah, you have that teasing out of different opinions, and you get that within the government. So Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, a central player in the coming discussion and debate and potential implementation of a change in the law, was against this move. So it's a reminder of how today has felt so different from most days here. We should also underline that yes, historical comparisons are made about the potential magnitude of a social change comparable perhaps with the Abortion Act of the 1960s, but it hasn't happened yet. There is much debate, much disagreement, and further votes to come next year.
Chris, thank you very much. Chris Mason there, our political editor. Well, in a moment we'll have a full weather update for you, but first another flavour of the debate.
I have seen uncontrollable pain, choking, and I'm sorry to say, the frightful sight of a man bleeding to death whilst conscious as a cancer has eaten away at the carotid artery.
The Rubicon was a very small stream, Mr. Speaker, but on the other side lies a very different world, a worse world with a very different idea of human value.
We should be helping people to live.
comfortable, pain-free lives on their own terms before we think about making it easier for them to die.
What I said to Tracy, who is a constituent of mine, who I met, is that I would allow just some of her words to be spoken today. There is just one black cloud on the horizon for me, and that is the way I will die. I am terrified that I will suffer a long, painful death.
The ayes to the right, 330. The noes to the left, 275. The ayes have it, and look!
Let's take a look at the weekend weather prospects now, and certainly it is going to be a lot quieter than it was last weekend, although there may not be huge amounts of sunshine. Certainly across the western side of the UK today we've had a lot of cloud. It's been producing some outbreaks of rain. You can see that cloud here on the earlier satellite image, but with that we've got some mild air coming our way, so temperatures over the next couple of days are going to be above the norm for the time of year. Now, a little bit chilly right now across some eastern parts, but we see this frontal system sliding eastwards with some outbreaks of rain, a lot of cloud following on behind, some mist and murk around some western coasts and hills. But by the end of the night, it is going to be very mild indeed. A mild start to Saturday morning, and that is the way it will remain through the day. Now, across England and Wales, most places will be dry. A lot of cloud, that cloud breaking up at times, particularly to the east of high ground, parts of northeast Wales, the West Midlands, northeast England, Northern Ireland and Scotland seeing a fair amount of cloud again. Best breaks in the northeast of Scotland, a few showers. It's going to be windy but very mild, 13, 14, maybe 15 degrees. Now into the second half of the weekend, here comes another weather front. This one will bring some outbreaks of rain for many areas. That'll be pushing its way eastwards as we go through the day on Saturday. Now, Sunday, I should say. Behind that, the skies clear out. We see more in the way of sunshine, still a scattering of showers and still very mild. But that is not going to last for a time early next week. We will see northerly winds returning, something colder. That in itself will not last long. By the end of the week, it turns milder again, but often wet and windy. Rita.
Thank you, Ben. And that is tonight's BBC News at 6. Now it's time to join our colleagues for the news where you are. From Westminster, goodbye.